Thank you so much for that introduction and for the invitation here to Helsinki. Before I get started, I'd just like to get a sense of the room. Who here is from the private sector? Just hands. Okay. Public sector? Policy nerds, show yourselves. All right, very few. Who here is from Finland? Baltics, CEE? Okay. Western Europe? Okay. All right. Great. Thank you so much. And last question, who here in the past year and 4 months has been to Ukraine? Hi. One. Well, over the past year, I've been traveling to Ukraine every couple of months, 5 or 6 times now. And the first thing you notice when you cross the border from Poland into Western Ukraine is really striking. It's nothing at all. The fields, the well-tended homes and gardens, the streets, everything looks exactly the same. But everything has changed. On one side of the border is safety, security, a sense of normality. And on the other side, Russia could bomb you. Russia could destroy the towns, the roads you're driving through. And the only reaction from the world would be a couple of headlines and outrage from the West. Now, when you drive along the front lines in eastern and southern Ukraine, another thing is striking, and that's everything. It is like a time machine back into the worst hell that our continent has known. You cannot drive along eastern and southern front in Ukraine and not feel in your bones and know Europe is at war. Now, this we know. Everyone with eyes in their heads has seen what the last year has wrought in Ukraine and that the world has changed forever, and maybe even given us the sense that the world hadn't changed as much as we thought it had since the Second World War. But there's actually worse news. And don't worry, there's a lot of bad news in this talk, but there's also a bit of good news. Now, the bad news is the war in Ukraine is just one battle being fought on the global stage. We find ourselves right now in a true war between authoritarian systems and democratic systems, between authoritarian states with great money and influence at their disposal, and democratic states who, while they also have a great deal of money and influence, haven't really noticed that the enemy is attacking them. This reality, we, everyone in this room, from a NATO country in particular, and from a democracy in general, congratulations, your country, our countries, are under attack. We are at war. And the #1 battle space of this war is, in fact, your space, the information space, cybersecurity, where our money flows, where our information flows, where our democracies live, where our democracies and economies live, survive, and thrive. Now, our governments, especially in the West, where we're a bit slower on the uptake on these things than perhaps our Finnish friends, we have realized that in terms of hardware, military hardware, that we are underperforming, that we need to increase production, that we need to put ourselves on wartime footing. But that memo has not been received in cybersecurity. And this is shocking when you consider that just in the past less than 10 years, what have we seen? Disinformation campaigns, active interference campaigns, all across Europe, in North America, and of course we can consider the examples, the Brexit referendum, the Trump-Clinton election in the United States. Chinese and Russian money and influence and cyber attacks deliberately targeting our democratic elections to push our political spaces and our societies in directions that are amenable to them. We've left the door wide open, we are under attack, and our governments, quite simply, are not capable, have proven themselves not capable of defending our countries and our collective democratic society. Now, that's a lot of bad news. Good news for you guys, because there was a lot of private sector hands there. The good news is, There is no international security without cybersecurity. It's good for your businesses, right? Growth market. The bad news? Or maybe the fine print, the terms and conditions? There is also no future for your industries without international security. So your interests, your jobs, your companies, you are directly embedded both in the future of our society, but also you, quite frankly, need to defend the information space in order to survive and thrive. And right now, I come mostly from a public sector background. I quit about 10 years ago and have been independent ever since. But bridging this gap between public and private sector as I do, it's very clear that we cannot rely on the public sector, both at the national and at the multinational level, whether it's our countries or EU or NATO. We cannot rely on them to build the systems we need and to coordinate fast enough to defend our elections, our democracies, and our public information spaces. This is where we need the agility of the private sector to take a first step. Now, what does that mean in a practical sense? Very specifically, we need private sector companies, or ideally a coalition of private sector companies, who are willing to have a task force, a global task force to defend democracy in general, elections, and public information space in particular. Now, what would this look like? I don't know, because I'm not a cybersecurity company. But here's, from a public sector perspective, what we need to see. We need to see the cybersecurity industry wagging the dog of international cybersecurity policy and coordination. We need to see private companies who can be agile, who can test, iterate, and then scale, say, we are creating a toolbox to defend democracies, not only here in Europe, not only amongst the Western industrialized nations, but also across Africa, Latin America, Asia. Our adversaries, and let's just be boring and specific, the Chinese and the Russians primarily, they're funneling hundreds of millions, on the Chinese side probably even billions, into their disinformation campaigns, into blackmail and bribery campaigns, into hacking of elections, not just in our countries, but all across the world. They are better financed, they are better organized, and they are playing the long game. So we need, from our side, from the free world side, we need to be willing to also invest in the defense of our democracies. And now I can hear the CFOs in the room thinking, well, but who's going to pay for it? Yeah, that sounds like a good idea, but we need a contract. This is all money. True. Defending democracy is not charity. All right, you'll have to take a first step and consider it an investment in your risk management and also in your future business development. Projects like this, helping especially fragile democracies, emerging democracies, protect themselves against malign influence campaigns, hacking, this is key to your long-term survival as a company, as well as to our collective long-term survival as democracies, as a community of democracies that we would like to actually see expand. This means being also willing to take the lead and learn from the example of the Ukrainians, as Viktor Zora just mentioned, working together with civil society, testing, iterating. So you don't need to do this alone. Having even a core team of the best in show, working together to create toolboxes, resource sets, and programs to help elections, election observation authorities, and civil society, journalists, political parties in emerging markets, in young democracies to defend themselves. This is work that will actually build a runway for your business development in those countries, in those markets, because when they are allowed to stay free and democratic and to grow and prosper, your businesses also will have a chance to grow and prosper with them. And this is also where I'm glad to be in Helsinki having this talk, because quite frankly, I'm coming from Germany. In Western Europe, we don't really get it. We're making progress, but we're slow. And also, just by virtue of size, Public-private partnerships, they're cumbersome. They take forever. Here in Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, you guys are smaller markets that really punch above weight in tech. You can be agile. You have quicker lines to your ministers and your ministry staffs. There's really an opportunity here in your region to get started on projects like these, especially also if you collaborate with Ukrainians. And then at a national or regional level, start, iterate, and then pitch to the EU. There is long-term funding available for this kind of thing, but you need to get started. Have something to show. Right now, we're sitting here, there's a coffee bar, we're in this cool space, we're going to have a fun party tonight. But right now, our friends in Ukraine, they're under fire. And I'll be honest, I'm exhausted. It's been a hell of a year. But there's a couple things that really keep me going. And the number one thing is the knowledge that individual action that converts into collective action is the greatest strength of any democracy. And it is also something that no dictator can survive against. Do not underestimate your ability to influence the events in this war, and in particular, the events of this global cyber war. Right now, we're just at the beginning. We're just at the beginning. We can't rewrite the history behind us that brought us to this disastrous point, but right now, what we do and don't do writes the future. So even if you're not sure what to make of where your company is, where you even as an individual within your company, what you can do, start thinking about it. Start talking about it. Come find me in the coffee break. Let's talk. Because there is so much that each of us individually can do in our sphere of influence. And when these spheres of influence connect, we can, in fact, change the course of the war in Ukraine, but also the global war against democracy that we are only just starting to realize has been ongoing for over a decade. Don't underestimate your power and your ability to influence events. And on that note, I'll put my money where my mouth is. I already, as the introducer mentioned, I basically stopped my normal consulting work when the full-scale invasion happened, and I've been basically civilian volunteer for Ukraine for the past year. And also, every penny that I earn from speaking at events like this gets donated to the Bild Foundation in Ukraine. And thank you so much also to Sphere for donating the proceeds from the swag booth to the Bild Foundation, who are one of the most prominent Ukrainian charities who have been supporting the Ukrainian government, military and humanitarian space. They're incredible, and I've been working with them on a couple of things also over the past year. So buy your t-shirts, make your donations, and above all, consider what your company in general and you personally can do to help build the arsenal, the cyber arsenal that we need to defend democracy in Europe and indeed in the world. Thank you so much.